The moment Princess Anne decided to break her silence, Meghan Markle's entire carefully controlled world didn't just shake, it cracked open like glass under pressure. Because this wasn't some anonymous insider whispering to tabloids. This wasn't another royal expert speculating on television. This was Princess Anne herself, the monarchy's most disciplined enforcer of silence, stepping forward with something far more dangerous than opinion: evidence. And the instant that BBC documentary aired, something shifted forever. Phones started ringing, contracts froze, media outlets pivoted. And in California, thousands of miles away, Meghan Markle reportedly stared at her screen, watching the narrative she spent years constructing begin to fracture in real time. Because for years, Meghan had mastered one brutal truth of modern influence: whoever tells the story first controls reality. But now, for the first time, someone else had entered the battlefield with receipts. It started quietly, the way disasters often do. A calm California morning. Meghan moving through her routine with the confidence of someone who had outmaneuvered one of the oldest institutions on Earth. The interviews had already been done. The emotional confessions had already been broadcast. The deals with streaming giants and publishers were already signed. Her version of events had settled into public consciousness like cement. She had achieved what few outsiders ever could. She had forced the monarchy itself into silence. But then her phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Again. And again. That kind of buzzing, the kind that doesn't stop, only means one thing: something catastrophic has happened, something uncontrollable. And when her publicist called, there was no polished calm, no rehearsed spin, just one sentence delivered with urgency that cut through everything: turn on the television. Because in that exact moment, Princess Anne was speaking, and not through vague palace statements, not through intermediaries. Through a documentary investigation broadcast to the world. Understand this clearly: Princess Anne doesn't do media. She doesn't chase headlines. She doesn't defend herself publicly. Her silence had been her armor for decades. Which is why her decision to appear in a documentary wasn't just unusual, it was a signal. A signal that something had crossed a line so deeply that silence was no longer protection. It was surrender. And the opening message of the documentary hit like a blade. The image Meghan presented to the world did not match the person behind palace walls. That wasn't gossip. That was a direct challenge to the foundation of Meghan's public identity. Because Meghan's greatest weapon had never been power. It had been perception. She had positioned herself as the outsider, the victim, the woman who dared to speak truth to an ancient institution. Millions believed her, millions defended her, and now, suddenly, the institution was speaking back. But it wasn't just words, it was incidents. Specific ones that had allegedly been documented and preserved in silence for years. One of the most chilling moments described involved a restricted archive, sacred territory tied to Princess Diana herself. According to testimony revealed in the documentary, a longtime staff member described discovering Meghan alone inside that archive corridor. Not lost, not confused, searching, focused, intentional. And when Princess Anne herself arrived, she allegedly found Meghan kneeling beside a locked box, holding something small in her hand. A straightened paperclip. Not a key, not authorized access, a paperclip. The implication was devastating. Because paperclips aren't tools of curiosity, they're tools of intrusion. They're tools used when someone is trying to force access to something they were never meant to open. And when confronted, Meghan didn't collapse into apology. According to Anne's account, she redirected blame instantly, pointing at staff, shifting responsibility, deploying confusion like a shield. It was a moment that changed everything. Because Anne didn't argue, she didn't shout, she demanded security footage. And here's the brutal truth about palaces. They watch everything. Cameras don't care about reputation. Cameras don't respond to charm. Cameras don't protect narratives. Cameras record reality, and according to the documentary, those recordings became part of a quiet internal reckoning. But the archive incident wasn't the only moment that allegedly shattered trust. Another revelation struck even deeper: a private tea at Balmoral, an intimate gathering with the late Queen herself. These weren't public performances. These were sacred private conversations. And Princess Anne noticed something others might have missed. A faint red reflection, barely visible, but unmistakable. A recording indicator, a phone placed carefully, hidden deliberately, capturing private royal conversations without consent. And when its presence was revealed, the device disappeared quickly, replaced with explanation, charm, deflection. But the damage was already done. Because recording private royal conversations wasn't just a breach of etiquette, It was a breach of trust at its most fundamental level. The documentary didn't stop there. It went further, presenting alleged audio evidence of Meghan speaking afterward, discussing editing, framing, production, not preserving memories, producing content. And that distinction changes everything. Because recording becomes weaponization when context can be rearranged, words can be cut, meaning can be altered, reality can be reshaped. And suddenly, the monarchy wasn't just dealing with emotional interviews. It was allegedly dealing with narrative engineering, strategic storytelling designed to control public sympathy. Because Meghan understood something the palace didn't, modern power doesn't come from silence. It comes from controlling emotion. Emotion moves faster than facts. Emotion spreads faster than evidence. Emotion locks perception before truth can catch up. And that was Meghan's greatest advantage. She didn't need to prove everything. She only needed to make people feel something first. Once emotion settles, facts become irrelevant because people defend feelings more fiercely than reality. The palace's strategy of silence, once seen as dignified restraint, suddenly looked like weakness. And Meghan's strategy of emotional transparency looked like courage. It was brilliant, it was effective, and it worked. Until now, because Princess Anne's documentary didn't try to out-emote Meghan. It tried to out-document her. It presented testimonies from staff who described manipulation tactics. Workers allegedly turned against each other through whispered claims. Trust allegedly fractured deliberately. Conflicts allegedly manufactured. Because conflict creates evidence, and evidence creates narrative, and narrative creates leverage. And here's the darkest twist. The documentary suggests Meghan's explosive public interviews may not have been reactions. They may have been preemptive strikes. Because according to Anne's account, Meghan allegedly realized palace officials had begun quietly documenting incidents, watching more closely, limiting access, building internal records. And once Meghan sensed that, she allegedly moved first, flooding the media with her version before the palace could ever present theirs. It was strategic timing at its most ruthless. Speak first. Speak emotionally. Speak loudly. Because whoever speaks first owns the battlefield, and anyone who responds afterward looks defensive, guilty, reactive. But Princess Anne didn't respond immediately. She waited. She gathered. She built something far more dangerous than reaction. She built contradiction backed by alleged evidence, and when the documentary finally aired, the impact wasn't loud. It was surgical, because suddenly Meghan's narrative wasn't alone anymore. It had competition, it had resistance, it had doubt, and doubt is poison to narrative control, because narrative only survives when it stands uncontested. The moment contradiction enters, the illusion weakens. And in California, watching that broadcast unfold, Meghan wasn't facing another tabloid rumor. She was facing the one thing she never expected: the palace speaking back. Because the real destruction didn't begin when the documentary aired. It began in the hours after, when silence from Meghan's powerful corporate allies suddenly became louder than any accusation Princess Anne could ever make. You see, Meghan's empire wasn't built on royal titles anymore. It was built on narrative equity. Streaming platforms, publishers, speaking circuits, they weren't buying Meghan the person. They were buying Meghan the story. The survivor, the exile, the woman who escaped the cold machinery of monarchy and told the truth. That story was currency. It was leverage. It was millions of dollars. And the moment Princess Anne introduced a counter-narrative backed by alleged documentation, that currency didn't slowly decline. It destabilized instantly. Emails reportedly arrived quietly. Partnerships paused pending review. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. Nobody announced abandonment publicly. Nobody needed to. In modern corporate warfare, silence is termination wearing a polite mask. Because corporations don't care about loyalty, they care about risk. And Meghan had suddenly become risk. Not confirmed guilt, not proven innocence. Risk. And risk is enough. Risk alone can freeze projects, collapse negotiations, and isolate even the most carefully protected public figures. Because association becomes liability the moment doubt enters public consciousness. And Princess Anne didn't need to prove everything. She only needed to fracture certainty. Because certainty had been Meghan's shield. Certainty that she was the sole victim. Certainty that her narrative stood alone. Certainty that the monarchy would never break its silence. But that certainty was gone now. And once certainty disappears, everything built on it becomes unstable. What made this even more devastating wasn't just the alleged incidents themselves, it was the pattern the documentary carefully constructed. Because isolated incidents can be dismissed, Misunderstandings can be forgiven, but patterns suggest intention, patterns suggest strategy. And the documentary painted a picture of someone who didn't just react emotionally, but someone who allegedly understood how emotion itself could be deployed like a weapon. Princess Anne didn't accuse Meghan of never feeling pain. She suggested something far more disturbing, that Meghan understood exactly when and how to display pain for maximum effect. That emotional vulnerability could become leverage, that tears could become timing. And timing, in modern media, is everything. The documentary introduced the concept of strategic emotionality, the ability to turn vulnerability on and off depending on audience and circumstance. Staff members allegedly described moments where Meghan appeared fragile in public but composed and calculating in private. Moments where emotional distress allegedly transformed into precise direction once cameras disappeared. Moments where sympathy allegedly became protection. Because sympathy shields narrative from scrutiny. People don't investigate victims, they defend them. And that protection is powerful. It can silence institutions. It can neutralize opposition. It can transform perception into permanent belief. And this is where Princess Anne's silence for years becomes the most revealing part of the entire story. Because silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. The palace understood something the public didn't. Responding emotionally would only strengthen Meghan's narrative. Fighting accusations directly would confirm her portrayal of persecution. So they waited, they documented, they observed. They allowed Meghan's story to spread unchecked because confronting it prematurely would only reinforce it. But waiting came with a cost. Meghan's narrative became dominant reality. It shaped public perception globally. It secured her financial independence. It turned her into a symbol of resistance against royal oppression. But symbols are fragile because symbols depend entirely on belief, and belief depends entirely on narrative consistency. The moment contradiction enters, belief begins to erode. Slowly at first, quietly, but inevitably. And Princess Anne's documentary wasn't designed to emotionally overwhelm audiences. It was designed to introduce contradiction. Security footage allegedly showing restricted access. Audio recordings allegedly revealing private strategic discussions. Witness testimonies allegedly describing manipulation tactics. Internal records allegedly documenting behavioral concerns. Each piece alone could be questioned. But together, they created something far more dangerous. Plausibility. And plausibility changes everything. Because plausibility invites reconsideration. It invites doubt. It invites the public to revisit everything they thought they understood. And Meghan's greatest protection had always been emotional clarity. She was either victim or villain, hero or manipulator, but now she existed in uncertainty. And uncertainty is lethal to narrative control, because uncertainty allows audiences to imagine alternative interpretations, alternative motives, alternative truths. The most haunting testimony came from staff members who had remained silent for years. People who had no public platform, no financial incentive, no reason to risk their privacy. And their message wasn't rage, it was exhaustion. Exhaustion from watching a version of events become global truth while their experiences remain buried. Exhaustion from protecting institutional silence while personal accusations allegedly damaged reputations behind closed doors. Exhaustion from witnessing narrative power reshape reality itself. Because narrative doesn't just influence public opinion, it influences memory, it influences legacy. And Princess Anne understood legacy better than anyone. Because monarchy doesn't survive on power alone, it survives on perception. Perception of stability, perception of integrity, perception of permanence. And Meghan's narrative had threatened that foundation. Not through violence, not through rebellion, but through storytelling. Because storytelling can dismantle institutions without ever touching them physically. It can reshape how history itself remembers events. And if left uncontested, Meghan's version would have become permanent historical record. That's why Princess Anne moved when she did. Not earlier, not emotionally, but strategically. She didn't try to outshout Meghan. She introduced contradiction into the record. She transformed rumor into alleged documentation. She reframed narrative warfare as evidentiary conflict. And that shift forced the world to confront something uncomfortable, the possibility that both stories existed simultaneously. That truth wasn't singular, that narrative wasn't absolute. Meanwhile, Meghan's silence after the documentary became its own form of communication, because Meghan had always responded quickly before. Interviews, statements, emotional clarifications, but now there was pause, calculation. because responding too quickly could legitimize the documentary. Ignoring it could allow doubt to spread, and choosing the wrong response could accelerate narrative collapse. Because in narrative warfare, timing determines survival, and the real damage wasn't visible immediately. It appeared gradually, subtly, like cracks spreading beneath a flawless surface. Public opinion didn't flip overnight, but it fractured. Some remained loyal, some became skeptical, some withdrew belief entirely, and that fragmentation alone was enough, because Meghan's influence had depended on unified sympathy, unified belief, unified narrative certainty, and now certainty had become debate. But perhaps the most devastating realization wasn't about Meghan at all. It was about narrative itself, about how easily perception can be shaped, about how silence can be interpreted as guilt, about how emotion can override evidence, about how whoever speaks first doesn't just tell their story, they define reality itself. Meghan had mastered that reality. She had controlled it flawlessly, until Princess Anne chose to challenge it. And now the world wasn't watching a victim or a villain. It was watching a narrative collapse under the weight of contradiction, watching power shift silently from emotional influence back to institutional documentation, watching a battle not fought with accusations, but with alleged evidence, watching a monarchy that had survived centuries of scandal adapt to the most dangerous battlefield of all, the modern media landscape. Because this was never just about Meghan Markle. It was about narrative supremacy, about who controls memory, about who defines truth, about who speaks first and who speaks last. And for the first time since Meghan left the palace, she wasn't the only one telling the story anymore. The palace had finally spoken. And this time, it didn't whisper. It presented receipts.